Just starting off with last week's game, just starting off with the positives. Obviously, it was great to find a way to win. When you not having your best day, not executing as clean as you need to find a way to get the win is definitely a positive. And I think, for Trevor, that's probably the first time in his 16 starts at Clemson that he kind of found himself in that situation. I know this year's offense, that was definitely our first time, being on the field in the fourth quarter, needing a touchdown to win the game. And I felt like our guys had some of the best execution there on that last drive and responded. I felt another positive. Trevor and T hooked up on 5 explosive plays down the field, none bigger than the 3rd and 6 on the last drive there. Obviously, there's a lot to learn from that game. Starting off, had a nice drive going in positive territory, 3rd and 2. We threw the screen out there and lost yardage. We're really in a 2-down territory, and after we lost yards, had to go for the field goal. And then a couple of drives later, we hit a nice 9-yard run and then fumble it on the next play, and then they go down and score a touchdown. And, just overall, I think we misidentified some of the blitzes that they were bringing. They did a really good job. You got to give them credit for some of the things they were doing from a scheme standpoint. But I just think, us not communicating correctly led to the sack and a couple of the quarterback hurries and made Trevor have to get rid of the ball a little earlier than he wanted to. I know one play we had Justin Ross for potential touchdown there and missed that. And then the other thing that really showed up that has not been a problem all year was the 5 penalties offensively, and penalties are really just drive killers. I mean, we had some nice drives going and then kind of stall because of kind of inflicted deal there with the penalties. And then, overall, the biggest thing watching the video was just, a lack of the consistent execution that maybe we've had in other games. So I think it was a good time for an open week. Last week was really beneficial for us, going back, not looking just at the North Carolina game, but really all 5 games and seeing where we can get better. I think you're really focusing on the details of what we're doing and the fundamentals of how we do it. Also did a really good self-scout offensively, and then also at each position, just looking at all the details, making sure that we're countering any of the tendencies that we may have. But, I felt like our guys responded very well last week, had a really good week of practice. I know it was good to kind of get a break this weekend for players and coaches and, get geared up, ready for Florida State this week. Looking at Florida State on videos, you kind of go through their season. There's no doubt that they've improved from where they were after the first 2 games defensively. They've probably played their best game defensively in their last outing with NC State, holding them to maybe 370 and 88 rushing. So you can see a lot of improvement. They're getting better game by game. Probably be the biggest defensive front that we'll face all year. They really primarily run an odd front, and I think they're 311, 346, and 305 across the board. So really big guys up front that kind of play 2 gaps and make it difficult to move those guys inside. They've done a good job getting some pressure on the quarterback. They've got 17 sacks on the year, and as always, very athletic on the back end, and just look like they're a lot more comfortable here these last few weeks, knowing what they're doing. For us, our next goal is to win the division, and this is a big division game for us. Seems like every year Clemson and Florida State end up having a lot to say for the division. So I know our guys will be refocused and ready to go Saturday at 3:30.
Who jumps out at you on that Florida State defense?
Yeah, I think really all 3 of those guys up front, just because of how big they are, they do a really good job of using their hands. You don't see them get knocked back very much. And then I think coming off the edge, they've got some guys that have created some, good one-on-one matchups with the left tackle and right tackle, and creating some pressure. And really what they're trying to do whenever they bring pressure from the edge is get the quarterback to really have to step up and then they're just kind of, trying to move that offensive line backwards and take up space there for the quarterback.
When you look at where Clemson is now, does it remind you at all where FSU was back in its heyday?
Yeah, it does for sure, and I've talked about that before. I think there's a lot of similarities in the culture of the program that Florida State had when my dad was there in the 80s and early 90s under Bobby Bowden, and maybe what we're doing now here under Coach Sweeney, and just the consistency that they had. I think they went on a run, at least 10 years, if not more, of top 5 finishes. If they'd had the playoffs back then, they probably would have had a couple more opportunities for national championships. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities. The funny thing for me is maybe being a kid, when I look back at kind of my dad's career, I think that we were at Florida State forever, and then we came to South Carolina, and then we've been at Clemson. And now looking back, my dad going into his 20th year here at Clemson, and he's been at Clemson now twice as long as he was ever at Florida State. So it's kind of unique now looking back, but there's no doubt those were a special time. Very similar to what I've been fortunate to do here at Clemson, kind of moving up from being a graduate assistant to a recruiting coordinator, and now in an offensive coordinator role. Is very similar to my dad's path there at Florida State, and for him to be able to work under a guy like Bobby Bowden, and then many years later me get the opportunity to do that under a guy like Coach Sweeney is very rare and a true blessing for our family.
Were you able to watch any of that Bowden dynasty on the ACC network? See your dad on the sidelines?
Yeah, I did. It's kind of funny. My dad was hanging on Bobby Bowden after one of those touchdowns, a lot like I can get caught hanging on Coach Sweeney celebrating. But what was really cool about that I guess video that was out there is for me the locker room images or video of the locker room and seeing Bobby Bowden talk to the team, like I was right there. I mean, I can remember sitting in Charlie Ward's locker looking over his shoulder as he was kind of sitting on the stool right in front of his locker, and that was the first time in whatever that's been 25 years that you actually get to see the footage of what you remember, and it was exactly how I remembered it. So that was neat for me, just kind of going back watching that, and it was kind of neat to see my dad when he was a little younger, and in there having those conversations with Coach Bowden on the sideline.
Yeah, our defenses, I guess specifically North Carolina and Syracuse, are they trying to take away the middle of the field at all, the intermediate middle stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can get a little bit too far down that road maybe on what defenses are doing. I mean, I think now after you played 5 games, we're seeing a little bit of everything. And I think it's just our job as coaches and players to number one, execute on what we're trying to do. And number 2, kind of find out how they're playing us and then go attack, the area maybe where they're weak. I felt like North Carolina did a great job. Coach Bateman's an outstanding coach. I was with him last year at the Broyles Award. We were both finalists for that and spent 2 days with him. And, he did a great job schematically with some of the things that they did. And, I felt like we made some adjustments and we had some plays there. I mean, you look back at, Cornell, on a little play where we felt like they were kind of had a lot of guys inside in the box, and we flip it out there to Cornell, and he's got a chance to run for a long ways and just falls down, and that's not something Cornell does a lot of. It's just kind of, for whatever reason, it seemed like it was kind of that afternoon for us, and we couldn't get out of our own way when we had opportunities to kind of take advantage of some things that we were able to see.
What did you learn about Trevor in this year's offense in the fourth quarter of a tie game?
Yeah.
You want to see that, but then again, maybe you don't want to see that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's like I said, that's the first time maybe that Trevor's been in that situation, and what we learned is maybe what we already think about Trevor. He's a guy that he's not a guy that plays tight. I mean, that's really, you got to give North Carolina credit. They did a good job. Their game plan was really to kind of limit our possessions, create a long game, get it into the fourth quarter, and then put all the pressure on us. And so maybe the normal situation for a quarterback in that situation would be to press and maybe not be able to execute. But Trevor was calm, and he knew exactly what he was seeing, and did a really good job on that last drive and went down and executed. And I think, like I said, there's something to be said for that. When you're going to have games where you're not playing as efficient and executing as well as you need to, but being able to find a way to win those games, even though you're not playing your best, is really what allows you to have the long string of consistency that we've had. But obviously didn't want to go through it, but it'll definitely be a good experience in case we find ourselves in a similar situation down the road.
Are there any differences in either how you attack the defense or how defense attacks you when they're an odd front versus more of an even front? Just kind of in layman's terms to the fans.
Yeah, there definitely is a difference. I mean, there's they're actually playing very similar to how North Carolina played us, and it's really just what Florida State does, of what we call an Okie front. So they've got, they're covering up your tackles and covering up your center, and then they got one other defensive end that can play either to the field or boundary, and they're really trying to buy up your 5 offensive linemen and get that end free on a running back, or maybe find a way to get you hot. But the biggest thing is it's different. Sometimes you have to block things differently for the guys up front, so there's some communication, especially on third down. Whenever there's different blitzes and things that are coming, it's different from an odd front to an even front. Now for us, the good thing is Coach Venables is very multiple, so we see a lot of that on our field. So it's not something that our guys don't get a lot of experience with. But yes, going back and forth